All right, we begin this morning with that hazy and dangerous air that's enveloping huge parts of the country and then the wide impact, that's having.
Right now, 100 million people are at risk because of poor air quality from the wildfire smoke. This is what it looks like outside here in New York this morning. You can see the whole city enveloped by an eerie haze. And look at this time-lapse video starting at 11 yesterday morning. You can see the Manhattan skyline disappear behind an orange fog. During that time, for the second day in a row, New York recorded the worst air quality in the world among major cities. What does that mean? Well, an air quality index higher than 150 is considered unhealthy. Higher than 300 is hazardous. Well, New York City yesterday hit 342, and some parts of the country were even higher than that. The smoke and cloudy skies are not only having an impact on our health, it also caused the FAA to issue a ground stop yesterday, temporarily pausing all flights into LaGuardia and slowing air travel into Newark and Philadelphia. And this morning, that smoke is still sticking around. We have full coverage. Just ahead, we're going to talk to Washington Post climate reporter Shannon Osaka, and meteorologist Angie Lastman will tell us when we can finally expect a break from all this. But let's begin with NBC News correspondent George Solis at Philadelphia International Airport. So, George, the air quality caused thousands of cancellations, and we also had more than 20,000 delays yesterday, including where you are in Philly. So walk us through that. Tell us how things are looking this morning.
Yeah, good morning, Joe. I don't think anyone or anything can really replace those images of the orange sky in New York yesterday. Here in Philadelphia, the air still hazardous. So as you walk into the airport, you can still see some people wearing their masks because they are taking those safety precautions. Not many delays here at Philadelphia International this morning, about 12 about the last time I checked. Obviously, that's good news with many people that are trying to travel today. As they know, many flights were delayed, canceled. Philadelphia issuing that ground stop. They lifted it yesterday late evening, saying that flights would be able to resume. But of course, airlines and airports are monitoring conditions very closely because the smoke is still very dense in some areas. We can take a live picture outside Philadelphia International this morning. Again, doesn't look nearly as bad as it did yesterday, but that haze is still there. There's still some smog and some folk driving through the city. You could feel it in your eyes, in your lungs, and this is why health officials are urging people to obviously stay indoors, wear a mask if you are going to be out, because again, right now the air isn't just hazardous for those with health conditions, it is hazardous for all. Will it start to lift? We are expecting that. But again, this morning here at Philadelphia International, flights are on time, but people are still being urged to get here early, check with their airlines to make sure some of those delays don't continue today. Joe?
You know, flying a little scary for some folks right now. Is there anything airports are doing or even can do to try and mitigate some of these travel issues?
Yeah, right now, best thing you can do is obviously if you have your airline's app to obviously keep an eye to see if there's any delays that'll creep up throughout the day. The airlines are doing their best to manage this. They have adequate staffing and crews for airlines, TSA, to get people in and out of airports as quickly as possible. We saw that increase during the Memorial Day weekend, but unfortunately with conditions like this, there's not a whole lot you can do to predict. Right now, looking at the misery map through FlightAware, JFK seems to have the most congestion in their airspace, but again, it is still early in the day, so we might see that map turn a lot more red, especially if that fog doesn't start to lift earlier and later throughout the day, Joe.
So folks who are traveling today, what should they expect? Are there any tips for what they should do?
Absolutely. Like anything else, get here on time. Don't leave anything to chance. You want to make sure that you have enough time to catch your flight. If you don't have the chance to check a bag, maybe try to bring that on with you as a carry-on. If you have pre-check, obviously go through that to try and mitigate as much of the time constraint that you may have trying to get on a flight, especially if you have a connecting flight. And obviously, if you're flying in and around the Northeast today, definitely keep those phones handy to keep an eye on those air quality conditions and, of course, any other delays that may ramp up. But the expectation is that some of this fog and some of this smoke should lift throughout the day, and hopefully conditions start to improve because, yeah, guys, it is nasty out there. No other way to put it.
All right, George Solis in Philadelphia, thank you so much. So if you're flying today or if you just want to go outside and walk, the big question, how much longer is this going to last?
That's right. Let's check in on that with your Morning News Now weather forecast with Angie Lastman. Hey, Angie, good morning.
Good morning, guys. The short answer to that question is that by the weekend, especially by the end of the weekend, we'll see major improvements. We still have a couple of days where it's going to be hazy. It's going to be dangerous out there as far as air quality is concerned, but we will see some improvements just in time for especially by the time we get into next week. Let's Let's start at the beginning, though. As we talk about all the records we broke yesterday, we, of course, were seeing record air quality, low air quality yesterday in New York since records started being taken. So that's pretty impressive. We came up on top of the worst air quality across the world. Detroit also making it onto that top 5, coming in at the 5th worst yesterday. Do we see many improvements today? Not in those areas specifically, but again, as we wait through the next 2 to 3 days, we will see better conditions. Still 100 million people impacted from this unhealthy air. This is specifically from the wildfire smoke. We have 120 million people that are impacted by poor air quality when you add in those ozone alerts that we're dealing with as well. But specifically when it comes to the wildfire situation and that smoke filtering in, we're still dealing with it coming in, moving across parts of the Great Lakes, parts of the Midwest. You're going to wake up to the hazy conditions in New York, Philadelphia, Detroit, all of those same kind of locations that we dealt with difficult conditions yesterday. It'll be a little worse for Philadelphia today. Even Washington, D.C. could see some of the worst air quality as compared to yesterday. But stretching really from Delaware to southern New York, that's where we see the bulk of the unhealthy to very unhealthy and hazardous even. So when we're talking hazardous, that means dangerous for everybody, no matter how much time you're spending outdoors. So wanting to take those precautions or just stay indoors altogether. Here's some of the latest air quality numbers that we're dealing with right now. You can see Allentown coming in at 312, Philadelphia 298. Earlier today, that number was well into the 300s and even 400s into the overnight hours. New York 184 still coming in the unhealthy range. If you are trying to get outdoors and you want to check in on these numbers, remember you can always go to airnow.gov and get those updates for whatever city you live in. But again, this is going to be something we'll deal with through today. Here's how the smoke progresses. This is 5 o'clock this afternoon. Still smoke around. The heaviest of it stretched through parts of Pennsylvania, over the Great Lakes. Still dealing with the hazy skies, though, in much of the Mid-Atlantic, Northeast. Detroit, this is Friday at 5 p.m. You're still going to be in and out of that poor air quality as well. By the time Saturday rolls around, though, guys, we'll see some improvements, especially from Boston to Philadelphia. Still the hazy conditions in some spots, but it'll be a whole lot better than the glowing orange skies that we saw yesterday that were, I mean, jarring, really.
Yeah, no one wants a repeat of that again.
No, we don't.
Oh, no, it was very, very scary outside. But even that, we're still talking about this 36 hours from now. Wow.
Yeah, we are. In those fires, they're starting to get under control, but of course it takes some time. And We're finally going to see the weather pattern move out and shift the winds, which is really important for us here.
And it's hard to predict what's going to happen this year, but we expect this to be a bad wildfire season for Canada, which means we could have this experience periodically throughout the summer, right?
Definitely. And we're already off to a record-breaking start there. The reason for this, many of those fires started from lightning, but also they're dealing with, a heat dome, we call it, which is something you see more often with climate change. It's basically a stuck high-pressure system that keeps it really warm, leading to really dry vegetation. And of course, we know one lightning strike or a human-caused fire, and we've got fires out of control. Climate change also plays a role, too.
Exactly what we're going to jump into right now. Angie Lastman, thank you so much. Good to see you. Well, let's bring in Shannon Osaka now. She's a climate reporter for The Washington Post and dig in on exactly what Angie was just talking about. Shannon, good morning. So I lived in New York for a decade. I have a bunch of friends who grew up here. Everybody's saying, I've never seen this before in New York City. Quickly followed typically by, is this climate change? Will we see this more? Walk us through that. What is climate change roles here? What impact are we seeing on the scale of wildfires in recent years? And then the potential for an event like this?
Well, it's funny. I mean, I'm from California, and in California, people have been seeing this for about the past 5 years or so. We have seen the orange skies before. We have seen this type of bad air quality, thick wildfire smoke, not being able to go outside for a week or more. So absolutely, yes, we are going to see more of this as climate change progresses. And the reason why is exactly what you were just talking about. As the atmosphere gets hotter, it dries out vegetation. That doesn't mean that climate change, sparked the wildfire. It didn't cause the lightning or the person who dropped their cigarette or anything like that. But it makes the conditions for wildfire more and more likely. In fact, Canada's Natural Resources Division has said that depending on how climate change unfolds over the next, several decades to 2100, they might see about double the amount of area burned than they do now. So we just know that climate change is making the conditions for wildfire more severe. We're going to see more areas burned, and that in turn is going to create more of these bad air days, days where the sky looks orange, days where you really can't go outside.
Absolutely. I grew up in Southern California prior to living here, and the smell here, I'm like, wow, it's reminding me of having to evacuate during wildfire seasons at home. You just touched on this, but, there's one thing is the event of the actual fires themselves. And then after that is this bad air quality we're seeing in several major cities. How is climate change connected to the way that this smoke and smog sort of hangs over areas, those weather patterns that Angie was just talking about? So in addition to the fires, what we might see after that?
Yeah, so I mean, we know that when there are hot conditions where you have these heat domes, where air is kind of stagnant and not really moving, that's when you get the worst bad air quality days. Now, in this case, there's weather patterns that are bringing the smoke down from New York, but we do know that over the past several decades, we have seen a lot more stagnant air days. This nonprofit research center, Climate Central, did an analysis, and they found that there's about 81% more stagnant air days in major cities in the U.S. than there were in the 70s. And so that just creates the conditions where, the smoke, bad air quality, particulate matter, it can't go anywhere, and it's just hanging over our cities, making it difficult to go outside.
What does this all mean in terms of trying to cut those global emissions? Where are we at? How much of an impact does that have? Tell us the latest there.
Well, we are in a stage where we continue to have extremely high global emissions year after year. Now, the good news is that certain developed countries, the U.S. has dropped its emissions in the last 10 years or so, so has Europe. But on a global scale, emissions are stagnant or still going up a little bit year after year. And in order to actually stop climate change from progressing, we need those global emissions to go to zero. That is a huge ask, and it is a huge project. But there is progress. We are seeing more growth of clean energy, and we just need to continue to push that forward. And I will say that I reported on the orange skies over San Francisco a couple years ago. And what I saw after that is that it really activated a lot of people. It caused some tech people to say, I'm going to go into clean energy. I'm going to forget about software engineering for a while. And I wonder if we'll see the same thing here on the East Coast, where people really start to say, okay, I don't want this for my children. What do I have to do? How should I change my career? How should I change my life to try to mitigate climate change more?
Yeah, Shannon Osak, I've been doing some reporting on that right now. Actually, a climate change trial is actually making it to trial in the state of Montana as young people are concerned about so much of this stuff. Shannon, we appreciate you being with us this morning. Thank you.
The investigation into the handling of classified documents by former President Trump is heating up this morning, and there are new indications that Trump could face an indictment. At a meeting with federal prosecutors on Monday, Trump's attorneys were told the former president is a target of the investigation. Two sources briefed on that meeting tell NBC News. A spokesperson for the Department of Justice declined to comment on this latest report. Trump's handling of classified documents came under investigation last year after they were discovered at his Mar-a-Lago home. 184 of them were marked as classified. On social media yesterday, the former president said that he has not been told he is being indicted and reiterated that he has done nothing wrong. For more on these latest developments, we're joined now by NBC News Justice reporter Ryan Riley. Ryan, good morning to you. So walk us through all this. What does it mean to be a target in an investigation like this? What are the likely next steps?
Well, it's not great for if you're Donald Trump. And I think, we saw a lot of indications of this and previously just building up to this, right? You could kind of surmise this from just the fact that there's this open grand jury investigation that, who they're interviewing exactly. Obviously this was announced back in November that Merrick Garland was made this announcement to appoint the special counsel to look into all of these issues surrounding Donald Trump after Donald Trump made his presidential announcement. So, it's not incredibly a surprise, but I think that it's clear now that we're getting to a real pivot point in this investigation, especially, I think, as we've seen indications that this investigation has basically shifted to Miami. And that's something that really we're only now learning, I think, in the past couple of days following this testimony by one of Trump's aides before the grand jury down there, that really this special counsel investigation into the documents issue specifically has really moved down to Florida and is really at a now pivot point. We saw the investigation unfold mostly in D.C., but it's pretty easy for federal prosecutors essentially to port all of that investigation down to Florida, present it before a grand jury, either by having an FBI agent come in and essentially summarize the testimony that happened in D.C., or by presenting a few new witnesses, so they can catch up to speed, I think, pretty quickly. And it would eliminate some of these jurisdictional questions, I think, that you would see if this case was brought in D.C., because most of these alleged activity happened actually in Florida. So that would essentially simplify this process. And I think that's what we're seeing now.
We have to remember there are two federal investigations here. Special counsel Jack Smith is investigating the Mar-a-Lago documents. He's also investigating January 6th. And sources familiar with the matter say that former Trump White House official Steve Bannon has now been subpoenaed by a federal grand jury in Washington. What more can you tell us about this case?
Yeah, it might feel like deja vu for voters a little, or for viewers a little bit, because they hear Steve Bannon subpoena, and you think back, and if you remember, last year we saw a situation where Congress, through the January 6th committee, had subpoenaed Bannon. He sort of stiff-armed that investigation, and as a result was convicted on 2 charges of contempt of Congress and was sentenced to 4 months in federal prison, which is basically pending appeal at this point right now. He's working through some appellate issues, but that sentence is still hanging over his head theoretically down the line. This, of course, is separate. This is the Jack Smith investigation. And it's a lot tougher to sort of resist one of these subpoenas once you get them from grand jury. As we've seen, all of these witnesses cooperate with that, because there are some pretty stiff penalties very quickly that if you don't that come about if you don't cooperate with a federal grand jury. So I think we're going to see Steve Bannon potentially come in here. And he's a key witness to a lot of these January 6 issues that are being under investigation by Jack Smith.
All right, Ryan, thank you so much.
Well, Pope Francis is recovering this morning after a 3-hour operation on Wednesday to repair a hernia. Doctors say the 86-year-old is in good spirits and should make a full recovery. NBC News foreign correspondent Claudio Lavanga is in Rome and joins us now with the latest here. Hey, Claudio, good morning. So what are we hearing from doctors right now about the Pope's surgery and how he's doing this morning?
Good morning, Savannah. Well, the Vatican just issued a statement in the last hour saying that following the abdominal surgery on Wednesday, last night, the Pope had a quiet and restful night, that he managed to sleep well, that he is alert and he's breathing spontaneously. Now, the statement also said the medical staff following Pope Francis at the Gemelli Hospital here in Rome said that the post-surgery checks and examinations are giving positive results. So that's also good news, and that he's expected to rest the whole day. Also, the Vatican said that the Pope is aware of the many messages of affection and closeness that are pouring in from around the world, that he's grateful for that, but he's also asking everyone to keep praying for him. Savannah.
Now, Claudio, this is just the latest health issue that the Pope is facing. We talked about this a lot yesterday. We've been covering this because he had bronchitis earlier this year, 2 years ago, part of his colon removed at this same hospital. Are all of that backdrop, is that having any effect on how doctors are treating his recovery?
Well, last night, on Wednesday night, the doctor that performed the surgery on the Pope met with us journalists just outside the Gemelli Hospital, and it was very clear that he said that the Pope has recovered fully from the previous health problems that he's had. First of all, in 2021, the colon surgery, he had 13 inches of colon removed following an infection there, and he spent 10 days in the hospital. He said he's fully recovered from that. The bronchitis, he said he's recovered from that, and they also expect him to fully recover from this surgery too, because they said that it was successful, and as we saw from the statement this morning, he seems to be recovering fast and fine. Savannah.
Also, in a statement, the Vatican did say that this surgery shouldn't have any impact on the Pope's ability to travel, which seems like good news since he does have several international trips scheduled in the next few months. What is his schedule looking like for the summer?
Well, that's right. The next big trip he's undertaking is to Lisbon in Portugal. He wants to go there to attend the World Youth Day, an event that he really cares about. He's attended all of them since he's become pontiff. That's still on. Only literally the day before the surgery, 2 days ago, the Vatican published the itinerary, opened up for the accreditation process and all that. So it seems like that this surgery is not affecting that at all. Well, then there is a big trip coming up in September. He's supposed to go to Mongolia, but there is no indication that this surgery will affect the travel either, Savannah.
All right, Claudio, thank you so much.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.